What's good, party people? This is According to Woods, and I have with me a very esteemed person, a person that might be internationally bound in a short time. But she is the major domo of Renegade Wrestling. She's the one, the only BigFemVader Ayesha Raymond. And I mean that's the pep. And I'm sorry that we're going to kind of move in terms of tone into the serious one. As you guys know, we like to keep it light and fun. But in this particular instance, we have a story that is horrifying, horrible, horrid, unjustified. Every like horrible connotation and adjective that you could have, or whether it be race, sex, of female in a precarious position, at a precarious time. It's all bad, and it actually comes by way of where Aisha was born and raised, London, and a school of London. And for those who don't know, because here in the U.S. we didn't get I didn't even know about it until Aisha brought it to my attention that there was a 15-year-old girl um, of African descent. And what we do know in terms of the facts was she was called out of her classroom because somebody somewhere in the administration of the school thought she smelt of weed, marijuana, and conducted at some point of this conversation a strip
Strip search.
search, right? Where no other advocate in terms of administration were with the girl, no parent was called or guardian was called on the side of this 15-year-old juvenile female. And what's worse, if not all of the things that I mentioned weren't bad enough, but she was actually going through a menstrual cycle while she was stripped naked in front of adults. And it's a story that gets worse. And of course there are bad things happening in the world, whether it be financial, the post-COVID world, Ukraine, Russia, the downfall of Afghanistan, the in the wrestling world, Big E breaking his neck, uh, the unfortunate passing of Scott Hall. All of these things are very, very. They don't elicit a bunch of joy, but this one we felt it was it was a duty to bring this to light because especially here in the U.S., it's not even talked about. It's not in the news cycle, and even furthermore, that we found out that unfortunately this was actually suppressed for 2 years, for one reason or another. So, I mean, Aisha, take it away. How did you find out about everything in this particular story?
Well, I actually particularly the way I found out was I saw a Vice article. So I was doing my usual in social media scroll, and I came across a Vice article. But then I also heard it from word of mouth, but I didn't believe the story until I saw the article. Um, it literally took less than 24 hours to circle my entire family, my friendship group. I already know that one of my friends was basically talking her mother's ear off about it. My mother also found on the internet somebody who gave their review and take of what happened, and that's how I actually found out it wasn't something that has recently happened, which makes it 1,000 times more worse. It was something that actually happened 2 years prior.
It's all weird, right? It's just all horrific, and even as I'm saying, horrible, horrific, disastrous. And none of them really filling the emotion and outrage that we feel about this particular situation. And we're on the outside looking in, not to be this girl, her family, all this stuff, and especially, as a parent myself and one who has raised a female daughter that, you know, um you drop your kids, and especially your daughter, as at school, to basically, one, give them some sort of normalcy and get a sense of, obviously, education. You want your kids to be educated at school, and you kind of know, along with the territory, there's going to be maybe some bullying by other kids and all this stuff. uh, but you'd never think that this could happen, that a violation of this magnitude could happen, and let alone be suppressed as it may.
I mean, the thing that gets me the most, and it's weird. It sounds horrible as much as her being female hurts my eyes. Her race, obviously, that's the main factor. But it's the fact that it was able to happen to a human, like somebody who's basically underage and vulnerable. And what should have happened, point blank, is her parents should have been called from the instance. It shouldn't have been a police matter, especially now, as people are of culture. Most people smell like weed all the time. Most people smell like marijuana all the time. It's not one of those. It's one of those distinctive smells, especially in London, where I don't get why that justifies a strip search. I have never ever in my wildest dreams ever thought that that was gonna be the case of anything. But I can't even form words yet.
Yeah, and it's wild, right? Because here we are, at least on the U.S. Kind of side of things, and obviously state to state, municipality to municipality, and county to county is a little bit different in terms of the rules and laws and regulations that are set forth, right? But honestly, I'm n- not too far away from Men's Central Jail in LA, where a lot of, you know, whether it be celebrities, rock stars, and what have you, but 90% of them are, criminals, but are criminalized. And I'm not saying the 90% are all kind of fall under this construct, but there is a large contingent of, especially males and males of color. We're talking about Latinos, blacks, Asians, that are Middle Eastern, that are basically still in jail, serving a 30-year to life sentence for weed that is now
Mhm.
legal, and they're still in there serving time, where even the dang prison guard can access it freely and openly and what have
And
you. There,
probably does.
yeah, and I mean, there's dispensaries here in LA that are much like a convenience store. Almost every other corner, right? So, and there, obviously, there's medical. We're finding out medical benefits to such things, rather than just like, oh, yeah, I got glaucoma, so I'm smoking my weed and whatever. It's my medication. But there are tangible benefits. But that is absolutely besides the point, right? So it's kind of ludicrous, right? Where the justification of a strip search, and we don't know where this happened. We would think that, or assume, and that's all we can do with the facts given, is assume that it was at a school grounds, right?
It was
On
on the school grounds. She was taken into a separate classroom. There were no other children in the room, obviously, but the only people that were in the room was the girl and the police officers, which is in its sense completely wrong. As police officers safeguarding, you're going to strip search an underage person without their parents there. Like
Yeah, and also, I mean, I don't know what the jurisdiction of what the faculty, because yes, there's a large part that you can basically blame the police at hand, right? That are the offenders, especially to this girl, but also the administration. There wasn't one like level-headed soul or going like, "Hey, this isn't right. Maybe I should step in, even if it means maybe getting fired or getting arrested or what have you for obstruction. Like there isn't any like uh, people involved, were that basically maybe grew up with this. I mean, I've seen this girl grow up, depending on the length of tenure that she was at this school, right? And know her, maybe know her family and what have you. That nobody spoke up and were like, "Hey, this is wrong. We
Hmm.
should step in." And especially, over the last couple of years, we've heard decrees of save our children," and
And this is what
at
you
red
do to our children.
right, and that's the catch. That's the catch 22 of that decree, and it's just like, and you hate to frame it in a mind of like a racial injustice, but also what other justification could be had to warrant what happened to e- negatively, irreversibly change this girl's perception of what safety is, the world is, what schooling is. There's
Hmm.
long-standing ramifications, physically, mentally, emotionally, that this girl has already gone through over the last 2 years, where, you know, being a female, now this is like learning from the stories of my sister, my wife, my daughter, my mom, right? My friends such as yourself, of what a female goes through and what female of color specifically go through. And then again, there's this a whole nother layer where if it wasn't hard enough, you interject this instance which everything that everything that your belief system, that you're safe, that you're equal, that if I earned good marks in school, if I play sport, like if you do all the right things,
If
that
I be a
I
good person, I'm going to be good.
exactly, and that's all shattered pretty violently.
But even in the sense of her, like it's a child. So at 15 years old, you spend 8 hours a day. I don't know how it is in America, but you literally spend most of the day at school. So those are the people that are to their duty. They have a duty of care to you. You would see these people more than you see your own family at at points and times of your life. Then you've got on the other side of authority the people that she's been told that if anything bad happens, these are the people to call because 999 works, and those are the people that are supposed to offer some kind of protection. So you've got two individuals and two different establishments that she's supposed to be almost leaning, well, not almost leaning on, she should lean on for the safety of herself and her peers and everybody else. And the two establishments that she could lean on both let her down. And it's like, well, then where do I turn? If she's now even if she is homeschooled after this, and doesn't trust the fact of going back into an establishment where she's with teachers and other people, when she's an adult, she's going to become like everybody else and not trust the police because why would you now?
No, absolutely, and it's there's so much, and just on a personal kind of anecdote, right? I remember being a kid. I was in elementary school, where my and this is pre cell phones and all internet and all that stuff, location services. This had to be the early 90s, and growing up in kind of the San Francisco Bay Area, which is pretty liberal, in terms of a lot of other cities in the U.S. and the world over, right? But uh, um, this occurrence that happened with my dad, where we didn't know where he was. He went to My dad was a musician, so he went to the Guitar Center to fiddle around or look at new equipment or whatever to buy, which is his usual fare. And as he's coming back, um, well, we don't know this at the time, but he doesn't come back home, and it's like 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, and I think it was like early in the morning. My dad comes through the door, right, and is reeking of urine and is pretty much inconsolable. And this is wild to me, because my dad he stood about 6'4". I'm much bigger stature than I, and to see him like literally rock to his core, and he much like me and even my nephew, had a stutter growing up, which he outgrew and what have you, but it came back, and he was trying to get out between tears and a stutter that read and I it's clear as day to me, even what 30 years later, and him not being here, but what ended up happening was there was a bank robber, a bank robber in a description of car that wasn't my dad's van conversion, van conversion, right? Uh, and a a heights and description, just black male from 4'11" to 6'5". Okay, from 185 to 245 pounds, right? Which so my dad, but also hundreds of thousands of people in the Bay Area could have, fit that description, as broad a scale as it may, right? And even 30 years later, I feel one of those deals, and I'm not as big as my dad, right? So, um, what ends up happening is on his way back home, he gets on the freeway, and the California Highway Patrol, one car, two car, whatever, and my dad, the law-abiding citizen, pulls off the road. And by the time he pulls off the road, he looks back, and there's 30 cars. There's literally 30 cars with guns drawn, with guns drawn, and it scared my dad. He urinated on himself. They took him to jail, right? Turns out, and in terms of the area in which it was, literally, it was the section of the freeway which was close to the exit, with I mean, like maybe miles from the exit of George Lucas's Skywalker Ranch in Marin County, California, right? Um, and that's wild because later Skywalker and Lucas Arts, basically does Red Tails, the story of the Tuskegee Airmen. But this atrocity that happened to my dad happened right there, right in front. And with that all being said, they basically take him. They basically take him for questioning, and that questioning went into the early morning. At the time, that they basically arrested my dad, they had found the bank robber an hour before, and in San Francisco, good 45 minutes away. None of that had, you know, I guess, come through the other uh, jurisdiction that my dad was arrested under, because news didn't travel as fast as it does now, as we know now to this day. So that is just and that was my dad, right? And that's a very personal anecdote that I have, that I saw right off the bat, right? In terms of people who he thought were there to help him and what have you, and what he believed and what he taught. And after that, there was a seismic shift in terms of ideology on how he viewed the police, right? So that was my dad, who is older and a military veteran and all of these things, had a wife, kids, or what have you. So now we flip it to this 15-year-old girl, and I can only imagine what she's going through. Like it is absolutely, I can't, I really can't stress enough, like, what the mental and emotional ramifications this will have long standing for this young life that full of promise.
No, I know. I mean, like, I'm glad that you told that story because I like, obviously not a child, but being stereotyped because of your race. I remember being in Norwich and a couple of the wrestlers did smoke, and there was a really strong smell of marijuana that came from the back of the venue that we were at. But all the brown people were nowhere to be seen. But the first people that they blamed were all the brown people, and it was just, or who basically was, there were three of us. Um, but it was just, it's, I don't, it's it's hard to comment on it because I don't understand how it still happens. In a world now where we cancel people basically based on opinion most of the time, you've got the violation of a child. Like we you can say an opinion and basically lose your entire career now, yet we're discriminating against children. That somebody who knows, well, they do know right from wrong, but we're supposed to be trusted to teach them what right from wrong is. How do you go about explaining this situation now to a different 15-year-old? Or even how did they go about explaining the entire situation to this 15-year-old?
And that's absolutely valid. And it sucks. I don't know. Obviously, there's little nuances in terms of region where it might, the rules and the situations at play are a lot different from where you are versus where I am and where any of you guys that are watching and listening, right? But like and just kind of a subtle deal, she was like, "Oh, call 999." Where versus here in the U.S. it's 911, right? Like your rescue agency. But those are subtle differences, right? But when you're talking about a minor and a female, like it it is so gross, right? It's so it's so frustrating that
How
like
can
we're
you
still
justify that as an adult? I don't get it.
and also again you would assume that, and again that's all we're because there's very little there's very little information given, and again that's how wild this is, right? Where 2 years later we still have maybe a paragraph worth of information, right? And I've been scouring. Aisha sent me the original Vice article that she checked out, also a pretty influential UK based content creator. um, he did a 13-minute kind of a dialogue on it, right?
Mr. Nick
And
Farage, LBC, there you go.
yeah, yeah, shout out to him. And then
Is that his name?
also,
Yeah, sorry.
yeah, and then also, obviously, Good Morning Britain within the last 48 hours had this as a as a kind of tentpole part of their broadcast, or their broadcast, as well it should be. But it's just, man.
It's weird. Like one of my friends described the situation as, because they knew I was going to be speaking to an American. Hi, and said, was very honest. If this would have happened in America, the scale and magnitude of the repercussions would have been abysmal. Like it would have, they literally would have gone through the streets, almost kind of burning everything to the ground. It's weird sort of sense. I'm not saying the British are quite docile in this sense and that we don't care, but it's almost like a comfortable racism. It literally is comfortable racism. There is no way in London that somebody in that school generally thought what happened was right. Even the person that probably called the police dialed the first two nines, got to the last one and went, and then still did it anyway. How multicultural like all our schools are. And I'm like, I went to a school where my secondary school had, in my class there were 3 white people. Everybody else was of brown skinned nature. And there is no way that how multicultural things are that it was justifiable racism that makes sense. That's why I say comfortable racism. They automatically smelt the bad smoke and then went, oh, it must be the brown person. And to make matters worse, the brown child. Like it's not even like you they could have actually saved themselves by phoning the parents and then having a go at the parents. That would have made more sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And we again, we don't know, and especially the fact that this has been suppressed for so long, right? In
Well, it
two
had
years,
to. Would
right?
you not put them on a gag order?
I mean, yes, but also the gag order would have to, like, the parents or whatever, because we don't know the girl's name, we don't know the family, we don't know anything other than given almost like a Jane Doe-esque name, and like student two, I think is what they were, most outlets are referring to the victim as. But it's y- to have a gag order to take place, in most respects, you have to have all parties involved kind of sign off, on this, right? So, um, and one of the things that happened here, or in like the OJ Simpson trial, right, where he was found non-guilty in terms of the criminality of murder, of Ron Goldman and Nicole Brown, who's his former wife, right? But then the Goldman and Brown families, they filed a civil suit, right, that went, in the form of restitution on the financial scale, right? So, with that all being said, right, um, that we haven't heard anything one way or another, whether there was any criminal charges placed upon the people, whether it be a criminal charge or at the very least, there's a train going, but at the very least, some sort of the officers that are in question that forced this girl in a separate room to strip, um, of her garments. There's no talk of or anything that we've heard by way of an administrative leave, paid or unpaid, or a temporary, like a year off, just whatever. Like, we haven't heard anything. Like, everybody here is almost nameless, and it's wild because in a day of social media and kind of, over the last 2 years of, whether it be COVID or particular lives matter, and shootings, and George Floyd, and and QAnon, and all of these things, right? All of the hackers, the people one side or another, and the radical way that they feel and whatever. That none of this got brought with social media. No, not one post, not one hashtag, not whatever, for 2 years. And then also think of what we are 2 years ago, right? When they're saying that this happened 2 years ago, right? Well, when in this kind of landscape that we now find ourselves in, was this, from January to March 2020, before the world got all crazy and whatever, or was it during the pandemic? And then, why were they in school during the pandemic? Because a lot of places were locked down. There's a lot of questions. There's a lot of things that I think have valor to be discovered, right? And not to say that this justifies the means of doing what they did, and to this girl, or even if the girl, and not trying to victim blame at all, but does she have a history of weed that prompted? Like, there's a lot of things, but again, nothing justified, and especially if I if she was going through a menstrual cycle, right? And this is whatever, you would have to think that she's just like, no, I don't want to do this, right? And then I'm going through menstruation, like I'm on my period, some sort of dialogue happening, and two people, we're assuming, right? An officer or two or multiple, or an administrator in the school are hearing her cries and still allowing her to proceed, right? And and this is it's a weird deal, because once you're in that kind of confine and placed in a separate room, you almost feel, even if you didn't do anything bad, you kind of feel and made to feel like you have committed something. You're on the wrongdoing of something, right? A couple years ago, there was and again, different circumstances, but there was an exterminator right? That he was a traveling exterminator, and one of the things that he would use for work was like this almost like modified pellet gun, right, to get rodents, larger ones, possums and what have you, right? So he was there with his significant other and their two friends who lived in that town, right? As they're coming to town on a gig, and they were in a hotel room, drinking. It's adults, consenting adults, right? Well, somebody called of a noise complaint, right? A noise complaint, and the local police came, and there's footage of it, but there there's multiple officers, at least four, but possibly more, shouting different instructions in terms of put your hands behind your head, walk towards me, get on your knees, whatever. And as somebody who might have already been inebriated and everything, and not that that justifies it, because you can be sober, and people with authority, at least four of them, are shouting things at you, and they've already detained your significant other, two of your friends, and what have you. You're already in a heightened state of anxiety and fear and everything like that. And guess what? He doesn't, I guess, hear or understand one of the orders being given to him and shouted at him and whatever. And one of the officers, or multitude of officers, go like, they take that as a form of just
A
dissonance,
defiance.
right? And shoot him dead, while his significant other and his two friends are cuffed, right? And they shoot him dead. All of those, right? All of the people, the four people, the two friends, and then the decedent and his significant other, all Anglo, right? And this is still happening in the U.S., somewhere in the Southwest. I want to say, something in me wants to believe it's like New Mexico and whatever, but that's something that happened to a group of grown adults, right? That are not of African, Latino, Latinx, Asian, what have you, and that still happened. And I don't care what restitution happens, that guy is still not here because of that, right? They were found at fault, the local police authority and the officers involved,
Mhm.
right? So is it one where it's a perfect storm where, like, there was like administrators of the school that didn't have this girl's best interest at heart, coupled with you know police that might have had a god complex, and felt like, hey, this is it, I'm going to get you today, or whatever. Might have woke up on the wrong side of the bed and what have you. Maybe they heard her pleas of, why are you doing this, as a form of defiance and what have you, and proceeded. And they were steadfast on what they wanted her to do. And it's just wild, because somebody, whether there be male or female officers, whether it be male or female um, administrators, that were basically, you know, I guess, putting this girl in this situation, where she was at her most vulnerable, naked and
Mhm.
on her menstrual cycle, in front of adults, without any sort of parental or adult um, security, right? Or an advocacy, right? She's placed in this situation, and it's just like, I hate that this statistic actually exists, but one out of six people living anywhere in the world know somebody in their direct circle that has been a victim of sexual assaults of some sort. And it's not just females, it's males as well, right? And knowing this, and knowing the training that you would think administrators and educators and people who are supposed to be justices of the peace, and officers of peace, and what have you, um, all of that, in that moment, none of it mattered.
Mhm. But it's just, it's weird that you say it S assault. I don't want to get your thing cancelled for buzzwords, but in a very strange form, a horribly having to say, this is almost kind of a case of S assault in the most sickest form, like that, and there is no laughter about it. Um, but yeah, just I, I don't understand the justification. Literally, as adults who've been trusted with the duty of care of other individuals. Let's not forget the fact that they are actually responsible for more than one person. Allowed this to happen, and then justified it to themselves by calling the authorities, because regardless or not of how not regardless or not how it happens, we'll never hear the full story, not for a while either way. But there must have been an initial conversation, at least before the police were called.
Yeah, absolutely. And even that, right? When you're talking about the, oh gosh, just the amount of shame, right? That has fallen on this girl, right? There's levels, right? Where first there's somebody somewhere making a complaint to maybe a teacher or somebody in the faculty that she smells of marijuana. That's one, right? And it, it, assuming that none of it, they're what they are accusing her, right? And again, we don't know, right? Maybe she might have had a puff to get over her menstrual cycle or what have you, like that, like. But if you're going to err in the side of, maybe believing that she's innocent, right? Well, again, so we get to somebody making an accusation that could have come by the teacher, that could have been for a fellow classmate, and you don't know about if it were a classmate, right? Did this classmate and the girl, the victim, have a not favorable rapport with each other, that that you're like, oh, I'm gonna get her today, I'm gonna tell the teacher that she smells of weed, right?
But even the
Like,
smell and the scent, she was found with nothing on her. So after that,
right. No, absolutely. And I'm playing a bit of devil's advocate because it's easy to go like, oh, all police are bad, all administrators are bad, because like here in the states, right, where here we are, in kind of learning how to figure out life in a post-COVID world, and whether we're going to send our kids to school or not, or what have you.
not anymore.
Right, but also you have the plight of teachers who, they really believe in the cause and wanting to, maybe coming from a socially, you know impoverished part of town, and making good and wanting to give back to their community, and attain higher education and come back to said community that raised them up, and be the canary in the coal mine for what you know what they ended up having, early on in their own pursuit of education or what have you. And at the same time, they're not being supported. Like we had a pretty well-known case in Oklahoma, the state of Oklahoma, where the teachers weren't paid. I mean, the teachers would have to moonlight as, grocery store workers and everything, and principals, would have to moonlight driving for Uber and what have you. Even some turn to like sex work, which it's no here nor there, right? But those are it, because you have mounting loans in the hundreds of thousands, if not millions, right? That you have to, rectify. And at the same time, your base pay is not changing. It's almost just, monetarily above, just like incrementally above what minimum wage would be, right? And you have all of these things that a teacher normally goes through, and you don't have the resources at all, right? And this is assuming like everything is good, right? And I don't know, I'm not as versed with the education system in the UK, and specifically in the city of London, one of the biggest, most influential cities in the world, and has been since pre-unite United States, pre 1776, right? Um, so there's all of these things, right? And all of the I guess pacts that you make, right, in terms of who you are, your ethics and what have you, right? And on this day, do you just completely turn your back on it, like the mounting stuff of, you know, whether it be a situation of COVID or not? We don't know the exact time of the the infraction, of this particular scenario playing out. Like, we don't know. It could have happened pre-pandemic when the world was still somewhat normal between January and March of 2020, if that full 2 years is what is to be believed when this occurred, right? But they're saying 2 years, and 2 years could, a media sense, look sexy rather than 18 months or 16 months or 15 months or 13 months or what have you. So we're just assuming, and taking with a bit of grace that we're not being lied to by mainstream media in this deal, right? And then there's the whole. I mean, this whole case is a Pandora's box because, again, if they're investigative reporters, right? And us, as people, are supposed to be connected through social media, as we're led to believe. Well, why wasn't one investigative reporter out of all the ones based in London, whether it be local, right? Local news, whether it be national news like the BBC, a lot of which centered in Britain, like nothing, right? Not one social media post, or was the family, maybe docs, like, if you release this information about this teacher, this cop, this whatever, then we're going to, you know
XYZ.
yeah, show where you live. And there's a whole, now you have, obviously, this horrific situation befall of the 15-year-old girl, but now her whole family is scared, right? And it's wild because I heard about a case in Florida where there was a it was a town in Florida that is synonymous with everybody in the town, having some sort of direct ties to law enforcement. The sheriff in that town, in that county, was the largest employer in that town and had been for generations, right? And one officer, ended up, you know, having a relationship with a girl in town whose family, whose brother, whose mom worked for the same law authority department, whatever, right? Well, she turns up dead, and they take his word rather than hers, and whatever. And this was an Anglo female, right? Actually, all parties involved, the officer, the families, the all Anglo, right? And that's America, right? That's supposed to be free and what have you. And you have that happen. And the family still doesn't have justice. They fired the brother, but now have rehired the brother after a police gala where the brother and um, the person, the officer accused of killing his sister, made amends. And now the brother gets his job back and, quits trying to, well, basically admonish the notion that this guy killed his sister. He's pretty much gone radio silent on the matter and is all buddy buddy and has his job back. Yeah, so that, and this, to me, I think, is a larger question of, like, what it really is to be a female living in this world, right? There's onslaught from every avenue, right? Whether it be family. Oh, you look ugly. You look beautiful, right? That's a whole different, complex. It's like the game of life. Which way do you go? Like, which card do you pull, right? And then that, basically gets into how you perceive the world, right? And you're like, I'm used and prone to being called ugly or not or beautiful, whatever. So how your interactions with the rest of the world going that, right? And then something with like a social media post. Oh, this person who might have a quarrel with you, whether you know it or not. You're like, oh, you're too pretty, you're too ugly, so I'm going to post on social media. And like a pack of dogs, like society is, and it has always been, even before social media, but it's been exacerbated by social media. They pack on whatever, and now this person now wants to kill themselves, even though their parents and whatever told them they were beautiful or not beautiful or whatever. Like if you were being told you were ugly by your parents or somebody in the family, and then somebody at school, that you're seeking solace away from all of that, and then now they're going like, oh, well, and then, geez, if they're saying it here, they're saying it here, it must be true. What purpose do I have? Right? Females attacking each other, males attacking females, like physically, mentally, you know, drugs, which again, this is another component of this story where supposedly, you know, the what got everybody's red alert going was these smells of marijuana, right? And again, it that is wild to me because again, if you're going through a menstrual cycle, um, unless you're actually, you know, smoking or ingesting or whatever, it's not gonna go through. Like, there's just so much. It's a Pandora's box of like every fear that one could have is a female minor of ethnic origins could have, and it all takes place in this particular scenario.
Mm. And it's just weird, like you said. It is tough being a woman, regardless of not as it is. Being a black female, you're gonna there's a little bit more labels that you have to deal with. But one of the I think one of the most disappointing things about this entire situation is that this is now generally a person who, at that moment in time, probably now for a while, is going to feel completely alone because you don't have she will have absolutely no understanding or concept now of the right to trust. And it's not even trust, the right to trust authority. It's the right to trust as a black female, as a human, as the just your entire trust system or circle has now been shattered. Um, and my heart goes out to her and her family. But something that you didn't mention is it's not like she wasn't the only one. This was the only one that we heard of. Um, as you were saying.
Yeah, there in this particular and
Cool.
yeah, in this particular school, there were 25 females, minor females, that were subject to the same accusation, right? 25. Two happened to be of Anglo descent and European descent, right? And then 23 ended up being of African descent of some form, right? And to me, that is a systematic problem, right? And that's 25 within this 2 year period, you know, where it had the story had been pretty much silent. So the story that we're talking about with you know, girl Q, right, is, or minor Q, is not even included in the 25 girls that this was being this accusation had been hurled upon, right?
Mhm.
So, is there a systematic deal there? Like, and you don't want to go more nefarious than what the story is already playing out to be, but you got to have to wonder if it's 25 girls in the last 2 years, and the last 2 years we've been in kind of COVID lockdowns for the most part, right? That's a big number. So how many more are there? And that's also one thing when you brought this to me, I was like, how many more? And not just in the UK, not just in Scotland, not just in Los Angeles, not just in, you know, Mexico, Colombia, like everywhere, Ukraine, Afghanistan, like, and of course there's different laws and different ways and protocols and way of life or whatever. But I I got that sinking feeling like this is happening everywhere. And how many suppressions are happening? How many, people that we think are just jerks or whatever have had something similar happen to them, and as they're trying to get some monicum of justice, they become silenced.
Hmm.
It's
Because it's
wild.
easier to say nothing and accept it than horrible. It's not that it's easier to say nothing and accept it. It's just easier to, as what people say, move on. And as what we've noticed now from what he said and what we've read 2 years ago. So in 2 years, everybody else was able to move on. What
Yeah.
about this girl or the other girls or the other minors? How many of them were strip searched? How many of them were arrested even?
Right. Yeah, and that's also one thing that I think needs it. I mean, sh- should have been talked about, right? Because unfortunately, society is very reactionary, right? Because you know, uh, stoplights, right? Stoplights weren't invented until people were in a considerable amount crash into each other,
Hmm.
right? Crash into each other. So we're like, we have to have a system. And then maybe it was the stop sign, and the stop sign didn't work, and whatever, right? And then the flow of traffic, right? There's a multitude of things, right? And everything is reactionary. More recently, right? Uber and Lyft, right? Uber and Lyft. If your city, your county, your state, your country has a any type of referendum in regards to what the Uber, Lyft, and rideshare policies are, right? Those are reactionary because they literally showed up one day, right? We were, basically using taxis and getting friends, to give us a ride to work, school, whatever, and then this thing, download an app, blah blah blah, and it was there, and everything, whether it be Lyft, or Uber, the scooters that you can rent, per minute, right? Everything is reactionary, right? And unfortunately, something has to happen for a rule, law, or anything to kind of take form, right? But in the 2 years since this has happened, so not just the one girl, but assuming like 25 other girls, right? Have we got anything from the school saying that this is what we're going to do to change? Because, or are you telling me that they were able to successfully uh, silence 25, possibly 26 minor females and their families, right? That not one person got on social media and or TikTok or whatever to talk about what happened to them, right? Or were a portion of that 23, 25, what have you, they were actually, kind of guilty of the accusation in terms of what the school uh, needed to find, right? That would further justify their action taken upon this one girl, right? Uh, there's a lot to unpack, right? But like, we haven't gotten anything from the school one way or another. Uh, they're almost as anonymous as the girl herself and the family themselves, and the families of all of the other girls that I mean, that were at least had the accusation hurled upon them, right? And all of the social disdain that happens that they are subject to because of this. Like, you're a baddie because you smell of weed or whatever. Like, it's just wild.
It's exactly what you said. You can't solve the issue, and you can't solve the issue. You can't fix the problem. You can't have a proper what you want, a proper system in place. A system in place should have. So many things just shouldn't have happened. But you can't do that without having the conversation because everybody was silent. Again, 2 years went by. The conversation wasn't had, so it was almost normalized. If you think about it, like you said, nobody said anything. So did it just get to a point where it was like, okay, if we don't say anything, it will be dropped and everyone can just move on with their lives, and then it will happen again, and then it happened again, and then it happened again, and then after the first one, it suddenly becomes 24 or 25 or 26 of whatever it was you said. but it's even having the whole one of the reasons why it again cannot be solved because the issue was never addressed. It's being addressed now, but as again, as what you said, reactionary. So now it's being addressed because we can all clearly see it was wrong, but you've got the buzz of social media where everybody now is just reacting to literally the most minute of information. Because like I've seen an article and somebody reacting towards it. That's literally it. And again, the conversation hasn't been had. You've heard other people's opinions over what happened, but they haven't had the conversation of why it happened at
Yeah,
all.
yeah, it's wild, and I think this is why we wanted to. Again, we usually keep it light and airy. We talk about the things that we love, pro wrestling, movies, albums. This is what Aisha and I have done. Aisha, in terms of empowering young females, with her promotion, Renegade Wrestling, with her herself as a person of color going over to Japan, coming over to America, being seen on WWE television, a part of one of the what was to be one of the most historic tournaments ever assembled. I think it was because if you look at that roster, that first Mae Young Classic, and what you all have done, since it's absolutely profound. But that's why I feel the immense honor to have female athletes, all athletes, but female athletes such as yourself in both MMA and pro wrestling, where in many ways there are things that are being taken away from you, but in absolute I guess in a way that is pleasable to most, right? Where you can garner a crowd in an MMA fight as well as a pro wrestling match, right? In a way that's somewhat socially acceptable. You are very forcefully taking back all of the things that have been stolen away from all of you.
Taking back slowly, if we can, but then like I said, like you said, trying to empower people. But then, how do you empower somebody when something like this happens? Like you can't expect somebody now to even trust that. Like I don't want to send my little girl. Like I wouldn't want. I would want all my children now to be homeschooled. In all honesty, for you, like I don't want my child in a school knowing that I'm whatever age I am. 10, 15 years later, they're still suffering the same prosecutions that I was suffering. We're supposed to be in the age of all inclusive and all acceptance. And it's just weird to think that something like that happened now. Like I said, in an age where people are cancelled based on your opinion or I don't know, doing one bad thing on your social media and you can lose your entire career, your life and your livelihood. But then we're still being partially subjected to racial discrimination even now in the 2020s, and it's just like, when does it end or when does it stop? When will that level of discrimination, especially when it comes to a child who knows no better at that time? Like I don't, I honestly had no inkling of racism, in my opinion, until um I left school. I didn't, because my family have always been so multicultural and my family has always been so accepting, and the way that I am, I've always been very open. I didn't know what racism was. So now this child at 15 years old, maybe it was her first introduction to how her culture and her race could be discriminated against. In London, it could be a possibility. She probably had absolutely no idea of why are they linking these things together. We don't know. But it's a simple fact that a child has been subjected to that. When a child is taught, a child of that age, depending on their life experiences, may have a different opinion, but I've always believed that a child is taught racism. And that day, those police officers, that teacher, the school, the administration, the entire team, that educated that child on a level of racism that was literally experienced during the civil rights days. where because of the color of my skin, I'm automatically labeled not only a drug addict, I'm a bad person, and I'm going to strip you naked from head to toe to make sure that I can justify in my heart that you're a good bad person, because that's all it was.
Yeah, and I mean, and it gets even unacceptable in terms of the details, where she was asked to the device that she had in terms of helping capturing her menstruation blood was she was told to remove it. So there she is, bloody, naked in front of. It's just it's just wild. It's just
It
absolutely wild.
it was just as you've heard about the prison dances that they did in South Africa.
Yeah, no, 100%.
So that's basically what it was. They may have literally had they should have had her jump up and down on one leg and clap, and they would have literally gone back to those days. That's what she was subjected to.
Yeah, and it's wild, and I feel for the girl, but I also feel for her family in the sense that it's hard enough to raise a child in this day and age. I, as a father to four, but definitely the 14-year-old, where I'm looking at him and I'm all like, because the older three are voting age and what have you, voting and drinking age, but I oftentimes wonder, am I handing him outdated information, right? Because the world in my lifetime has never evolved to the point of what it is today, right? As quickly, right? I mean, think of what the concept of a phone was in the 2010s to what we now know, where we've got mini computers,
Right.
so in our pockets. So it's just it, that's already what a parent kind of has to go through, right? Living and raising a kid in this time. And I was thinking about it, like, oh, should I've not had kids or whatever? Nobody knows what your financials are going to be, or if you're going to have this job, or have this car and have this way of life when you decide to have kids with a significant other. If even if your significant other and you a relationship is great, and then something changes later down the line, or there's a multitude, or if the thing wasn't necessarily great in the first place, and now you have to live a life where you're not going to be with that person or whatever. These There's a whole lot of things. That's why my dad taught me, like, when you are talking to somebody, you give them utter respect, because if you think about what a baby has to go through from inception, from egg to embryo, the scientific form, right, to how many sperm to one egg and whatever, and which one got through, and I guess in comedic form it was put in the Lucas talking movies of how that whole thing,
Oh,
right,
Mikey, what do you
right,
say?
right, exactly, and getting through, and all the things that the mother have to go through, the father, if he's in the picture, has to go through, what a um for this kid to be in a loving, supporting environment, and how many others aren't in a loving, supportive environment. There's um we're speaking of Scott Hall pretty briefly passing, and one of the things that got me, I was actually a little bit disappointed with the WWE tribute. I didn't think it didn't hit me the same way, but it was because I saw, when I found out he eventually had passed on, a video of him on Jerry Springer, pre Jerry Springer, fights and strippers and everything like that. When Jerry Springer was still trying to be on the level of like a Sully Josh and Raphael or an Oprah and what have you. And, Scott Hall walks out as Razor Ramon. And, there's two kids sitting on the panel on stage, and they're big wrestling fans and what have you. And this, I believe, was around the time post Mania 10, where Scott had two intercontinental titles, but he
Mm.
walked out with one. And I found out later, and actually, it's on the KC commentaries, the kayfabe commentaries vault, which is up now. But Scott Hall actually ended up giving one of his IC titles to the kids, and I can't remember what the boy's ailment was, but the girl was Heidi Broadbent, who has in the last 25 years, I want to say, she was the first one of the first generation of kids that were born with HIV, right? Born with HIV, and now that she's older, we found out that it's so low, uh, a concentration that she can still live a life, but she will still test HIV positive and what have you. But Scott Hall in the U shoot kayfabe commentary said that he still kept up with Idea
Mhm.
and still made appearances for HIV and what have you. But these are one of the many scenarios that a kid could go through, a socioeconomic advantage versus disadvantage of where you were born and whatever. And then again, you get all this, right? And then you have a human, with all the joys, all the pains that life can bring up to that point, and they're in front of you, right?
Mhm.
That's why you give them. I was taught to give them out of respect for me to earn respect, and unfortunately, the people in play, I don't care what this girl could have done. I mean, aside from shooting somebody, and we're in the day and age of school shootings, and unfortunately, they're more common than they're ever before in
Mhm.
history. That is something that we have to kind of take into account in our daily lives, right? And with all that being said, they didn't respect her enough to give her decent human rights,
Dignity, like
dignity, rights.
literally, just to be a human. They didn't. They, but again, they didn't respect her enough. Was it adults seeing a child and going, ah, or again, was it race? Well, it was both. But like you said, they didn't even respect her enough to give her basic human rights. Especially now after Me Tooing, after speaking out, after all this stuff, when we're trying to make sure that safeguarding people is up to a T and up to 1%, the place that it should have happened failed the most.
Yeah. So I think this is important, and unfortunately, this is kind of open ended because this is something that is still going on. This particular case, but scenarios like this that unfortunately has played out through the annals of history, since the inception of man, right, and woman specifically. But I think what we can do is bring light to some of it, and because again, I don't think there is a lot of light shown to this, and the compassion towards our fellow man and woman, and whatever, whatever you want to identify, like it just that we like, let's all figure it out with each other, accept each other. I don't care who, which side voted for, whatever. We all have to come to the table and just want the better, want the better
Mhm.
for ourselves, but also want the better of each other and expect the better of each other, because if not, we're going to still be talking about this 10, 20, 30 years from now, 100 years from now, assuming that we exist 100 years from now. We're not looking too hot right now.
Well, I tried. My eyes are still puffy. I have
Yeah.
emotions.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, but cryogenics could fucking come into play, or Elon
No,
Musk's
it
neuro.
was the crying.
Oh, oh, the cryogenics. I got what you mean.
Cry. There we go.
There you go. You clever person, you. But again, with that all being said, not to give it a complete and utter, just like, oh my god, the world sucks. But we
Mhm.
encourage you to have a great day. Mo's audio is like, looking into it 100%. And dudes at Ringside Podcast, what's going on? What's going on? And we hope you guys are well. And we hope all of you just health, wealth, and prosperity as you go about your days, your life, the lives of your family. And again, just talk about these un- uncomfortable things, uncomfortable situations, because I think they have a way of impacting people in a way that you wouldn't normally if you just sequester to your own group, the people that you got along with, and everything like that. And I think this is it, where these people, whether it be the administrators or the cops or whatever, they were all in accordance and whatever.
Mm.
They didn't, and the opposing kind of sentiment was coming from this 15-year-old girl in her most vulnerable state, physically and mentally. And here we go.
And
Yeah,
and that's
but
where we are with the world.
that's where we are, in a multitude of other things.
Everybody's equal. Stop lying.
Yeah, yeah. But speaking of equality, how can people equally find you and your whereabouts and what you're doing? Everything with Renegade, everything about your travels that are uh, are on the horizon, the horizon sun, so
Yeah.
to speak. Yeah,
Well, if you type in Ayesha Raymond, I'm the only one, and you can do that. You can also type in at BigFemVader on any social media platform, and you will find everything that I can do. Not only that, but we talk about all inclusion. I run Renegade Wrestling Dojo, which is an all inclusive wrestling company with no boundaries, no discrimination, and no exclusion of anybody of any kind, whether that be male, female, anybody in between. That is my purpose in life. The purpose for me for Renegade Wrestling, you can check them out on RW Dojo on every social media platform, is just happiness. After so much drudge and negativity in the world, I like to promote wrestling happiness. That's my thing.
yes, absolutely. And I have seen it, and the happiness that is on the minds and souls and bodies of each competitor at Renegade Wrestling Dojo. It's amazing. I have been fortunate enough to come in and commentate the first show. Looking forward for the second one. But speaking of things to find people doing, I can be found doing stuff. I can guarantee you, I do stuff. What that is,
We
I
don't
don't
know.
know. I
I
don't
still
know.
don't know yet.
I still don't know. But if you are so fit, I'm according to Woods. You're definitely watching this podcast. Go ahead and check it out. I have a link tree on the socials on all of the stuff that I'm doing, which may or may not include podcasts such as this, dumb shit memes. Sometimes Eric Bischoff, sometimes not. But with all that being said, according to Woods is where you can find me. And again, the overwhelming sentiment is just be to paraphrase one Jerry Springer, be good to yourselves and each other. Yeah,
Please.
yeah. Peace.
Hey, this is Zeta Zhang. Make sure